Welcome to In-Silico Trials Real Impact, the In-Silico UK podcast that's revolutionizing the way we think about medical innovation. I'm Professor Alejandro Frangi from the University of Manchester, and I'll be your guide through this fascinating world of in-silico technologies. In each episode, we'll dive into cutting-edge research and groundbreaking news that are shaping the future of medical product development and regulation. From computational modeling to simulated clinical trials, we are exploring how digital approaches are transforming healthcare, making it safer, more efficient, more equitable, and incredibly precise. So, whether you're a researcher, regulator, a member of the public, or a patient representative, or simply curious about the future of medicine, tune in as we unravel the complex world of in-silico methods and their real-world impact. Get ready to discover how computer-simulated trials are leading to very real breakthroughs in patient care. In-Silico Trials Real Impact, where algorithms and data are saving lives. Let's begin.
All right, let's unpack this fascinating world of modeling and simulation in healthcare. You sent us a really interesting article that dives deep into what makes these virtual experiments credible. Especially important as they start playing a bigger role in drug development, device design, and even personalized medicine.
Yeah, it's really incredible how much we're starting to rely on these computational models for major healthcare decisions, from predicting how diseases might spread to evaluating new treatments. But with that comes, the inherent risks if these models aren't actually trustworthy.
You hit the nail on the head with that word trust. This deep dive isn't just about making sure the math is right. It's about all these practices that make a model dependable and transparent for researchers, for clinicians, and even for policymakers.
Right, absolutely.
So the article lays out these 10 rules for credible practice, and they really build on each other. Would you say that's a fair assessment?
Yeah, definitely. They very much build on each other. And they all kind of stem from that first one, right? Clearly defining the model's purpose and intended use, what they call the context of use.
Right, context of use. It seems so simple, but why is that foundational? Why is that the most important thing?
Well, I think you can imagine trying to build a house without knowing what it's going to be used for. Is it a family home? Is it a skyscraper? Is it, a beach hut? Without that clear purpose from the start, everything else becomes a lot harder, right? And so defining the context of a model is like creating that blueprint. You're outlining what the model is supposed to do, the questions it's aiming to answer, who's going to be using it.
It's like setting the stage, making sure everyone's on the same page before you even start building.
Yeah, exactly.
So that initial clarity, that context of use, that impacts every decision that comes after it, right?
It really does, yeah. Everything from the data that you use to how you test the model, even to how you communicate the model's limitations.
Which brings us nicely to rule number 2. Use contextually appropriate data. So it's not just about having tons of data. It's got to be the right data for that specific purpose, for that context.
Exactly. You wouldn't use straw to build a skyscraper. You need the right materials that fit the job.
Perfect analogy.
And the article gives this really interesting example where researchers were developing a model for human movement. So they needed data on the musculoskeletal system, right, to simulate how people move. And what they used was actually data from cadavers.
Wow, okay.
Because that gave them the specific information they needed.
That's a really powerful example.
Yeah, it shows how crucial it is to choose the right data for the model's credibility.
But it goes beyond just the data itself, right?
It does.
We need to know where the data came from, how it was collected, what are its limitations.
You've got to be able to trace it all the way back, understand its origin, yeah.
It's almost like a detective meticulously documenting their evidence to build that rock-solid case. And it all comes back to trust. If I know you're using good data, solid and relevant data, I'm much more likely to trust your findings.
Exactly. It's all about transparency and rigor.
So rule number 3, evaluate within context. This is where we take those models and really put them to the test.
Right, exactly. But the key here is that it's not just random testing. You have to test it, evaluate it within that context we defined earlier.
Right, the purpose of the model, how it's going to be used.
Yeah, the tests you choose should directly align with those things.
Can you give us an example of what this evaluation process looks like?
Sure. So it generally involves 2 main parts. First, you have what's called verification, and that's where you make sure that the model itself is working correctly, that the underlying math and equations are all sound.
So like double-checking the calculations.
Exactly, making sure it's internally consistent. And then you have validation, and that's where you compare the model's predictions to real-world data to see how well it actually matches what we observe in reality.
So it's not enough for it to be like mathematically perfect.
Right.
It has to reflect what's happening in the real world.
Exactly. It's like, if you're designing a new car, You wouldn't just test it in a simulator. You'd want to take it out on a real road and see how it performs in real-world conditions.
It's a great analogy.
You need to see how it handles those real-world bumps and turns.
And this rigorous testing, it seems especially important for those in silico trials we talked about.
Yeah, absolutely.
The ones that use computer models to simulate clinical trials.
Right. In silico basically means performed on a computer.
Right.
And these virtual trials, they have this huge potential to really speed up drug development and get treatments to patients faster.
Which is incredible.
But if they're going to be used to make decisions about new drugs and devices, then regulators like the FDA need to be confident that those models are rock solid.
That makes perfect sense. Now, what if a model, during that validation phase, what if it doesn't perfectly match the real-world data? Does that mean it's, automatically a failure?
Not necessarily, no. I mean, we have to remember that all models are simplifications of reality.
Right.
You can never capture every single detail.
Yeah.
And so what really matters is understanding the level of accuracy and how that relates to the model's intended use, right? What are you using it for?
So it's about understanding those limitations and being really upfront about them.
Yes.
And that leads us perfectly into rule number 4. List limitations explicitly.
Transparency is key, yeah? Every single model is going to have limitations. Maybe it only applies to a certain population, or maybe it relies on simplified assumptions, or maybe there are just gaps in the data that it's based on.
Right.
But acknowledging those limitations up front actually strengthens the model's credibility.
How so?
Because it shows that you've critically evaluated your work.
You're not trying to hide anything.
Exactly. You're being honest about its potential weaknesses.
It's like reading the fine print before you sign a contract.
Yeah.
I want to understand the whole picture.
Right, and it really builds trust. When you're open about the limitations of your model, it shows a commitment to honesty. And it helps other people avoid drawing inaccurate conclusions from your work.
Okay, and finally for this section, we have rule number 5, use version control. This one sounds a bit technical.
Yeah, it can be, but think of it like tracking changes in a document as you're working on it. With a model, as you're developing it, you're constantly making tweaks, maybe adding new tilde, refining the equations, things like that. And version control is basically a way to meticulously document every single change you make.
Okay.
So that you have this detailed history of the model's development.
So it's like a logbook of its journey.
Exactly. It's like a detailed logbook. It records who made what changes, when they made them, and why they made them.
Interesting.
And this is absolutely crucial for reproducibility. If someone wants to, replicate your results, they need to know exactly what version of the model you used.
And this meticulous record keeping, it's not just important for research, right? If regulators are looking at models for these in silico trials, wouldn't they want to see this kind of transparency and accountability?
Absolutely, yes. It gives them a clear audit trail for every step of the model's development, which is essential for building confidence in its reliability.
It makes sense, yeah.
It's like having a chain of custody for evidence.
Okay, so we've covered the first 5 rules here, which really focus on making sure that the model itself is sound, using the right data, testing it properly, being transparent about its limits.
Yeah, they lay a really strong foundation for the next set of rules, which are all about how we actually share these models and make them accessible and usable for others.
Right, taking it beyond just the individual researcher.
Exactly, moving from that sort of internal development phase to how these models can actually have a broader impact.
That makes sense. So let's dive into those next 5 rules, starting with rule number 6, document appropriately.
Ah, yes, documentation. This is such a crucial but often overlooked aspect of modeling.
Really?
Yeah, it's not enough to just have the code. You need to make the model understandable to other people. And that means providing clear, comprehensive documentation.
Like a set of instructions so someone else can use it properly.
Exactly. Imagine trying to assemble a piece of furniture without any instructions. You might eventually figure it out, but it would be much easier and less frustrating if you had a clear guide.
It's a painful experience. I can attest to that.
Right. And good documentation, it helps bridge that gap between the, complex technical aspects of the model and the people who need to use it, whether those are other researchers, clinicians, whoever.
It ensures that everyone's on the same page.
Exactly.
And that the model can be used and interpreted accurately.
Precisely. Think about it this way. If a model is going to be used to make decisions about healthcare, we need to be absolutely certain that the people using it understand its intricacies and limitations.
Right.
Thorough documentation is essential for that.
And from a regulatory perspective, especially for in-silico trials, I imagine this is really important for groups like the FDA.
Oh, absolutely. They need to be able to dig into the model, understand how it works, see the data it's based on, grasp its limitations. Comprehensive documentation is crucial for providing that level of transparency.
It's all about making the model as transparent and accessible as possible.
Yeah, that's the key.
And speaking of accessibility, rule number 7 is disseminate broadly. So we're taking this idea of transparency even further.
Right. So it's not just about explaining the model clearly. It's about making it truly open and accessible to others.
How do researchers actually do that? What are some ways to disseminate these models broadly?
Well, there are a few approaches. Some journals are now accepting model submissions alongside research papers. There are also online repositories specifically designed for sharing models and code. And some researchers even make their code open source.
Interesting. And this kind of open approach, it really aligns with the growing emphasis on transparency and reproducibility in science, right? If others can scrutinize your model, test it, even build upon it.
Yeah, it strengthens the scientific process as a whole.
It's a powerful way to invite that scrutiny and encourage collaboration.
Absolutely. If you're confident in your work, you're not afraid to let others see how it's done.
Right, you're not trying to hide anything.
Exactly.
And this level of openness, it's got to be especially important for those in-silico trials we keep talking about.
Absolutely.
For them to gain wider acceptance.
Yeah, regulators need to be able to independently verify and validate the models, and open access is really the key to that process.
It's about ensuring that these models are being used responsibly, and that their results are reliable and meaningful.
Exactly. It's about building trust.
Okay, so moving on to rule number 8, get independent reviews.
This is a crucial step. It basically means bringing in experts who were not involved in the model's development to take a look at it and provide unbiased feedback.
So a fresh set of eyes.
Exactly, a fresh perspective.
To look for potential issues or biases that the original developers might have missed.
Right. It's like having a panel of detectives poring over every detail of a case. You want a diverse range of expertise on that panel.
Yeah, I can imagine.
You might have clinicians who will be using the model, other modelers who can assess the technical side of things, even ethicists who can weigh in on the broader implications.
Right, that multidisciplinary approach is really important, especially given how complex and ethically sensitive healthcare is.
It's essential, yeah. Those outside perspectives can help identify blind spots and ensure that the model is, robust and reliable and ethically sound.
And it adds that extra layer of credibility.
It does.
Especially for models that are being used in those high-stakes in-silico trials.
Absolutely.
Where the results could have a real impact on patient care.
Right. And from a regulatory standpoint, independent reviews provide that additional assurance to agencies like the FDA that the model has been thoroughly vetted and that it meets their standards.
Okay, rule number 9. You've referred to this one as the scientific bake-off. Test competing implementations.
Yeah, I love this one.
I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
So this rule encourages researchers to really explore different approaches to solving the same problem instead of just relying on one model. They're encouraged to develop multiple models, maybe using different algorithms or even different data sets.
So it's like trying different recipes to bake the same cake.
Exactly.
To see which one turns out best.
Yeah, you're trying different approaches. You're not looking for the one true model. You're recognizing that there might be multiple ways to get at the answer. And by comparing the results from these competing models, you can get a much deeper understanding of the strengths and weaknesses of each approach.
It's like getting a second opinion from another expert.
Right, exactly.
To make sure you're making the best decision.
And if all the models point to the same conclusion, then that strengthens your evidence considerably. It's like having multiple witnesses corroborating the same story.
Makes the case much stronger.
Yeah, exactly.
And this seems incredibly valuable, especially in the context of in-silico trials. If a company comes to the FDA and says, hey, we've got results from multiple model implementations, and they all support the same findings, that adds a lot of weight to their claims.
Oh, absolutely. And even if the models don't produce identical results, understanding why those discrepancies exist can be incredibly valuable. It can actually lead to improvements in the models themselves and contribute to more robust and trustworthy results.
So it's about embracing that diversity in the modeling process.
It is.
And using it as a tool for deeper understanding and stronger evidence.
Exactly. It highlights the fact that modeling isn't just about plugging numbers into a computer. It's about thoughtful analysis, critical evaluation, and a commitment to finding the most reliable answers possible.
All right, so we've made it to the final rule in these 10 rules for credible practice. Rule number 10, conform to standards.
Yes, standards.
It sounds important, but it's also broad. What does that actually mean in practice?
So it's all about making sure that your model aligns with established guidelines and best practices within the field of modeling and simulation.
Okay.
Think of it like building codes for a house.
Right.
They're there to ensure, safety and quality. And in the world of modeling, standards serve a similar purpose.
So it's not just about building a model that works, it's about building it the right way.
Exactly.
Following those accepted principles and guidelines.
Uh-huh.
And these standards, they can cover all sorts of things, right?
It can, yeah.
From data privacy to ethical considerations to software development.
There might even be specific standards for the type of model you're developing. Like, if you're building a cardiovascular model, there might be certain standards that apply specifically to that.
It makes sense. So adhering to these standards, it not only enhances the model's credibility, but it also makes it easier for others to understand and use, right?
Exactly, yeah. If everyone's following the same playbook, so to speak,
Right, that makes sense.
it creates a common language and a shared understanding.
And from a regulatory perspective, it gives agencies like the FDA a framework for evaluating these models.
Exactly. It helps them ensure that the models meet certain requirements before they can be used for things like, drug approval. So
Right.
conforming to standards. It's really about demonstrating a commitment to quality, transparency, and ultimately to patient safety.
Absolutely. So we've now covered all 10 of these rules. They really offer a comprehensive blueprint for ensuring credible modeling and simulation in healthcare. It's not just about the math, it's about so much more.
It really is.
It's about transparency, it's about rigor, it's about a commitment to those best practices
It's about the whole process.
throughout the entire process, yeah.
From start to finish.
And speaking of the broader picture, we've talked a lot about these In-Silico
I
trials.
have.
They clearly have this incredible potential to transform drug development,
Yeah, they could really change the game.
to make it faster, safer, more efficient. But what is the rise of these credible In-Silico trials? What does that really mean for the future of drug development?
Well, I think it has the potential to be truly revolutionary.
Mm.
Imagine a world where we can test new drugs and treatments virtually, using these complex computer models that can mimic human biology.
Okay.
That could dramatically accelerate the whole drug development process. We could get life-saving treatments to patients much, much faster.
That speed is really the game changer, especially for folks who are, facing serious illnesses.
Exactly. Time is of the essence in those situations.
And it's not just about speed, right?
No, it's not.
In-Silico trials could also help identify potential side effects and safety risks much earlier in the process.
Yeah, so you're reducing the risk of harm to human participants in those later stages of testing.
So it's about making drug development more efficient, but also safer and more ethically sound.
Precisely. It's about, aligning those goals.
That's really powerful.
But for this to truly become a reality, these In-Silico trials need to be incredibly trustworthy. Regulators like the FDA need to have absolute confidence in the reliability and the meaningfulness of those results.
And that's where these 10 rules for credible practice really come in.
Exactly. They're the foundation.
Every single one of those rules.
From defining the model's purpose, to getting those independent reviews, to testing those competing implementations, it all contributes to building that trust.
It's the framework for ensuring that these In-Silico trials are conducted with the same rigor and scientific integrity as traditional clinical trials.
Absolutely, we need to hold them to the same high standards.
So it's not just about the technology itself, it's about using it responsibly, using it transparently.
And ethically.
Yeah.
And as more researchers adopt these practices, and as we gather more evidence about the effectiveness of In-Silico trials, I think we can expect to see a gradual but significant shift in how new drugs and treatments are developed.
It's not going to happen overnight, but it feels like we're on the cusp of something really big.
It does.
A major transformation in how we approach drug development, one that has the potential to improve countless lives.
It's a really exciting time to be working in this field.
It is.
The future of healthcare is being shaped right now.
And these 10 rules, they're going to play a vital role in guiding that transformation responsibly and effectively.
I couldn't agree more.
This has been a truly fascinating deep dive into the world of modeling and simulation in healthcare. We've explored those credible practices, the intricacies of those In-Silico trials, and the transformative potential of these technologies.
Yeah, it's a rapidly evolving field, and those principles of credibility, transparency, and rigor are only going to become more crucial as these models become more sophisticated and as they become more integrated into healthcare decision-making.
It's a good reminder that while technology can be this incredibly powerful tool for good, it's really up to us to use it wisely and ethically, to always keep the well-being of patients at the forefront.
I completely agree. The potential is immense, but we need to proceed thoughtfully. And always strive for excellence in our modeling practices and never lose sight of that human impact.
Well said. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. It's been a pleasure.
It's been my pleasure as well.
We'll see you next time. All right, so we've talked about 9 rules for credible modeling and simulation in healthcare, covering everything from the purpose of the model to testing different approaches. But there's one final rule we haven't discussed. Rule number 10, conform to standards.
Right, standards.
It sounds really important, but it's also kind of broad.
Yeah.
Can you break it down for us a bit?
Sure. So basically, it's about ensuring that your model aligns with established guidelines and best practices within the field.
Okay.
Think of it like, building codes for a house. They're there to make sure that the house is built safely and to a certain standard of quality. And in the world of modeling and simulation, standards serve a similar purpose.
So it's not just about building a model that works. It's about building it the right way. Following those accepted guidelines, those standards can cover a whole range of things, right?
They can.
Data privacy, ethical considerations, software development practices.
Exactly. And there might even be specific standards for the particular type of model you're developing.
Okay.
Like, for example, if you're building a cardiovascular model, there might be certain standards that apply specifically to that type of model.
It makes sense. So following these standards, it not only enhances the model's credibility, but it also makes it easier for others to understand and use.
Absolutely.
Because everyone's on the same page.
Yeah, it's like having a common language, a shared understanding of how things should be done.
Right. And from a regulatory standpoint, it gives agencies like the FDA a solid framework for evaluating these models to make sure they meet certain requirements.
Right, before they can be used for things like drug approval or device testing.
So conforming to standards, it's really about demonstrating that commitment to quality, to transparency, and ultimately to patient safety.
Absolutely. It's about showing that you're taking all the necessary steps to ensure that your model is reliable and trustworthy.
So we've covered a lot of ground here with these 10 rules. They offer a really comprehensive blueprint for ensuring credible modeling and simulation in healthcare. And it's clear that it's not just about the math. It's about so much more than that.
It really is.
It's about transparency, rigor, a commitment to those best practices.
And a deep understanding of the context in which these models are being used.
Throughout the entire process.
Exactly.
And speaking of that broader context, we've talked a lot about In-Silico trials during this deep dive.
We have.
And it's clear that they have this incredible potential to really transform the way we develop new drugs and treatments.
Absolutely. They could revolutionize the field.
But what is the rise of credible In-Silico trials? What does that really mean for the future of drug development?
Well, I think it has the potential to make drug development much faster, safer, and more efficient. Imagine a world where we can test new drugs and treatments virtually, using these sophisticated computer models that can accurately mimic human biology.
Okay.
That would allow us to identify promising candidates much earlier in the process and potentially get life-saving treatments to patients who need them much sooner.
That speed could be a game changer.
It really could.
Especially for people facing serious illnesses where time is of the essence.
Exactly.
And it's not just about speed, right?
No, it's not.
In-Silico trials could also help us identify potential side effects and safety concerns much earlier in the development process.
That's right.
Which could help minimize the risks to human participants in later stages of testing. So it's about making drug development more efficient, but also safer and more ethical.
Precisely.
That's incredibly powerful.
It is, but for this to become a reality, those In-Silico trials need to be incredibly trustworthy.
Right.
Regulators like the FDA need to have complete confidence in the reliability of the results.
And that's where these 10 rules for credible practice really come into play. They provide that essential framework for ensuring that those In-Silico trials are conducted with the same rigor and scientific integrity as traditional clinical trials.
It's about holding them to the same high standards.
So it's not just about the technology itself.
Right.
It's about using that technology responsibly, transparently, and ethically.
And as more researchers embrace these practices and as we gather more evidence about the effectiveness of silico trials, I think we can expect to see a real shift in how new drugs and treatments are developed.
It's not going to happen overnight, but it feels like we're on the verge of a major transformation.
I agree. It's a very exciting time to be working in this field.
This has been a fascinating deep dive into the world of modeling and simulation in healthcare. We've explored the importance of those credible practices, the complexities of in-silico trials, and the potential they hold to really transform the way we develop new treatments
It's a rapidly evolving field, and those principles of credibility, transparency, and rigor will only become more important as these models become more complex and more integrated into our healthcare decisions.
It's a good reminder that technology can be an incredible tool for good, but it's our responsibility to use it wisely, ethically, and always with the well-being of patients in mind.
I couldn't agree more. The potential is immense, but we must proceed thoughtfully, always striving for excellence in our modeling practices, and never losing sight of the human impact of these technologies.
Well said. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. It's been a pleasure.
It's been my pleasure as well.
We'll see you next time.